So thank you all for being patient and and waiting through this technical difficulties we had. So again, we are the CAA Chinese chapter, and we're presenting Harvey's presentation on Echoes Through Time, U.S. China Relations and the Chinese American Experience. So if you don't know, Harvey is a continuing lecturer in the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. So Harvey is interested in research and writing about the evolution of the Asian American and third world social movement activism on campus and in the communities. He was also involved in the I Hotel History Committee to write a timeline history of the struggle. He teaches Asian American Studies at UC Berkeley, and in 2016 was awarded the American Culture's Ronald Takaki Teaching Award. And he uses his community work experience to bring life to Asian American history, Chinese American history, and contemporary issues course. And many of his students have gone on to work in social justice causes. So without further ado, Harvey, you have the floor, and you can throw up your presentation if you want and share that with the audience, or you just talk.
Okay, so today's topic is on history of U.S. China relations, and I was thinking of focusing it with regards to how it affects Chinese immigration over the years. My name is Harvey Dong, and I've been teaching Chinese American history at UC Berkeley since 2006. Okay. My own background is my father is second generation American born with Hoi Ping background. He grew up in Sacramento, Chinatown. The first part of his life was through Chinese exclusion. He went to City College for about 2 years. He went to UC Berkeley, was drafted and sent to the Philippines to fight in World War II. My mother is first generation Thai Chinese. She was affected by different legislations that prevented women from entering the country, including the Page Law. She went through the Sino-Japanese War, and she entered the United States under the War Brides Act. Okay. U.S.-China relations is the social, political, and economic interchange between the U.S. and China. It has always been critical in understanding the history of Chinese in America. Friendly relations corresponded in favorable treatment of Chinese immigrants. Antagonistic relations corresponded negatively. This did not mean that Chinese were treated equally the same as European immigrants, because the founding fathers of the U.S. actually envisioned a nation settled predominantly by white settlers. There's this quote by Ben Franklin in 1751 stating, "I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind." Chinese were viewed only as guest workers and not as settlers. The historian Hubert H. Bancroft of the Bancroft Library wrote in 1890, "The Chinese were alien in every sense. The color of their skin, the repulsiveness of their features, their undersized figure, their incomprehensive language, strange customs, and heathen religion conspired to set them apart. Their contributions has only been that of quote unquote guest workers." This was in History of California by Hubert H. Bancroft, Volume 7, 1890. He saw the Chinese, in terms of their contributions, as only that of guest workers, being temporary for their labor. China was under Manchu domination 1644 to 1912. China was under Manchu domination through the Qing dynasty. And the Qing dynasty was constantly affected by political instability. There were internal rebellions, millenarian movements constantly challenged the Qing dynastic rule. The West was entering an economic phase of industrial capitalism. It sought expansion of its products into China. The Chinese economy was feudal based and its trade doors were restricted, regulating all trade to only one port for all of China. Great Britain and other European powers challenged this policy. Under the guise of the slogan free trade, they worked together to weaken the Qing government political and economic controls. The situation in the United States. In the United States, the US was a younger nation than China, several millennia after China. The US was maintaining a dual economic system consisting of an industrialized US North side by side with a slave-based agrarian US South. A clash of two contradictory economic systems would eventually lead to Civil War 1861 to 65. The Southern Confederacy sought to expand the institution of slavery into the new Western territories that threatened the capitalist North. After the Northern victory, the United States expanded its industrial capacity. Great Britain had the largest network of colonial controlled areas, which included British India, Canada, East Indies, West Indies, Africa, South America, and Central America. The US also aspired to become a colonial power, but it was only beginning. The Opium Wars were rooted in trade imbalance between Britain and China. It involved the illegal importation of opium by the British-owned East India Company into China to offset this balance. China fought back, but lost to the British. Unequal treaties were signed. This resulted in indemnity payments, removal of the Cohong tariff trade system, opening of coastal ports, introduction of Christianity, implementation of extraterritoriality rights to the Western powers, the succession of Hong Kong, succession of Kowloon. Chinese laborers were exported as coolies to work in colonial projects and as free labor to the United States. The colonization of China led to the decline of local cottage industries, and it also led to large-scale migration of a newly created transnational army of Chinese workers. U.S. involvement with regards to the Opium War. The U.S. aligned with Great Britain in the Opium War and imposed onto China their own unequal treaties. John Quincy Adams, former U.S. president, 1825 to 29, accused China of being unneighborly and anti-commercial. Adams defined free trade to include the sale of opium in China. U.S. traders procured opium planted in Turkey and sold to the Chinese market. The trade increased the wealth of many U.S. families, including the Perkins family of Perkins Hall of Harvard and the Roosevelts, great-great-grandfather of FDR. While the opium addiction, at the same time, opium addiction created deep harms to the Chinese population. The Burlingame Treaty of 1868 was an agreement signed between the U.S. and China. It was a mutual treaty that allowed citizens of both countries to have free immigration, travel, and personal protection in each other's countries. The Chinese were given the right to free immigration, travel within the United States. The rights of Chinese citizens in the United States were protected in accordance with the most favored nation principle. The treaty also gave the citizens of two nations reciprocal access to education and schooling. The agreement reinforced the principle of equality between two nations. Moreover, Burlingame facilitated the outward migration of Chinese laborers who were in high demand. The Burlingame Treaty actually um, took more of a labor recruitment direction. While free to travel, uh, they were not allowed citizenship in the United States. The 1790 naturalization law in the United States only allowed citizenship naturalization rights to free white persons, in which the Chinese were not considered white. While the Burlingame Treaty allowed protections for Chinese immigration, the 1875 Page Law included anti prostitution measures which excluded the entry of Chinese females into the US. Under the Page Law, Chinese women immigration applicants had to go through a process of providing proof that they were not prostitutes. Uh, this entailed harsh interviews and health checks. Younger women applicants were especially singled out and vigorously interrogated. The Page Law discouraged and limited the possibilities of family settlement, creating forced bachelor existences in the Chinese immigrant community. After the Page Act or Page Law was passed, the gender ratio was 48 women per 1,000 Chinese men. Before the Page Act, uh, it was just a little bit better, something like 78 Chinese women per 1,000 men. Chinese women categories at that time included merchant wives who were sequestered within the home of the merchants, Muay Thais, if these were indentured young girls who worked within the merchant homes, and prostitutes who were unfree and recruited and managed by the Chinese underworld. Chinese labor was indispensable. Favorable relations between the U.S. and China led to the expansion of American ports into China. The first Opium War opened a certain number of ports, and then the second Opium War tripled those numbers, okay, all along the coast. Um, so the favorable relations between the U.S. and China led to the expansion of American ports into China and the outflow of Chinese labor and enterprises into the U.S. In the latter 19th century, Chinese labor was indispensable in fulfilling the labor requirements of the West. This included the completion of infrastructure projects such as the Transcontinental Railroad, land reclamation projects, levee building, the installation of water systems. If it were not for Chinese labor, the infrastructure and economy of the West would not have succeeded. However, protections provided by the Burlingame Treaty that allowed for free immigration were short lived. By the late 1890s, anti Chinese sentiment and violence intensified within the United States, um, particularly in the Western states. Industrialists and politicians often promoted anti Chinese activities through blaming Chinese labor for unemployment. The ire of pauperized white workers was deflected. A new treaty was signed in 1880 that revised the Burlingame Treaty, and in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act abrogated its free immigration clauses altogether. The Chinese Exclusion Acts uh, began in 1882. It was extended for 10 years in 1892, extended for another 10 years in 1902, and in 1904, Chinese exclusion was permanent law. The anti-Chinese movement began with street agitation, agitation on soapboxes. This resulted in the passage of Chinese exclusion laws. Exclusion was a unilateral action by the U.S. and did not really involve negotiations between the two nations. To the Chinese, exclusion represented the decay and weakness of a government that did not have the power to protect its own people. The weakness became exposed multiple times when incidents of anti-Chinese violence took place. The Qing government representatives had little influence in obtaining justice for the victims of driving out the Chinese pogroms that were taking place throughout the American West. One example of that would be under left, a meeting notice announcement to address the Chinese question in Tacoma, Washington. After that mass meeting, the Chinese were rounded up, placed in the middle of town, and then marched out. Decline in legal Chinese entries. Under the Chinese exclusion law, Chinese workers were denied entry. There were exempt groups that allowed entry, which included scholars, merchants, professionals, and diplomats. Because of the anti-Chinese agitation and violence, even the exempt group numbers declined. 1883, 1 year after the Chinese exclusion law, there were 8,031 exempt entries. 1884, 279, 1885, 22, and 1887, only 10. The writer Fei Mayan Ing, who wrote in her autobiographical work, Orphan Bachelors, all his life, my father raged that the exclusion law was a brilliant piece of legislation because it was bloodless. He intoned, America didn't have to kill any Chinese. Her law assured none would be born. Chinese nationalism. The Qing government was too corrupt and weak to protect its citizens overseas. Efforts to replace the Qing government then emerged through different movements, political movements, through the reform movement led by Kang You-wei and his disciple Liang Qijiao in 1895, through overthrow of the Qing dynasty, through revolution led by the Kuomintang party led by Sun Yat-sen in 1911, and through building a peasant army under the Chinese Communist Party led by Mao Zedong in 1921. These movements, including their many, many ideological differences of which path forward, were reflected in the Chinese communities overseas. They all focus, though, on the goal of nation building. Save China, save ourselves was a slogan of organizations such as the Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance of New York. In the community's eyes, China's salvation was interconnected with the plight of Chinese in America. China was viewed as an ally during World War II. This led to changes in how the American public viewed Chinese Americans. Chinese American organizations emerged. They fundraised to defeat the Japanese invasion of China. And this overlapped with allyship with the United States, especially after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. There were protests involving Chinese American and white American organizations, uniting Chinese American and white American organizations and labor unions at shipyards in San Francisco, opposing the transportation of war-related materials from the U.S. to Japan. During World War II, the U.S. concentrated 85% of its fighting forces in Europe and relied on China to do the bulk of the fighting against Japan. This was during World War II. Debates then took place in Congress that led to the repeal of Chinese exclusion in 1943. Repeal resulted in small immigration numbers, 105 entries per year, passage of War Brides Act of 1945 and its extensions, and most importantly, naturalization rights for Chinese aliens. Post-war Chinese America, small in numbers, could now move outside the segregated Chinatowns. They could now enter the middle class, become naturalized citizens. Chinese Americans in military service receive oftentimes automatic citizenship if they would sign up. They obtain GI education and housing loans, which allowed for Chinese Americans to become part of the middle class. Assimilation becomes the predominant ideology in the post-war period. The community itself was fragmented into different communities inside and outside the Chinatown enclaves. There was a reversal of fortune around the time of the Korean War, which broke out in 1951. Reversal of fortunes occurred with the worsening of U.S. China relations due to the Korean War. Chinese troops were engaged in combat with American soldiers. There would be press reports about how many Americans were killed in the fighting. Chinese American loyalties then were questioned. Repression takes place in the form of the 1950 Internal Security Act, which had anti-sedition measures, 1952 Immigration and Naturalization Act, which also had anti-sedition and deportation measures of suspected enemy aliens. The Hong Kong Consul General, Everett Drumright, released a report about the entry of illegal Chinese immigrants, and that a network of espionage was passing through this illegal immigration. There was a federal grand jury investigation of all Chinese organizations in the United States. Grand jury investigations included the demand that Chinatown organizations and photo studios release memberships and photos of reunions and weddings and gatherings so that people could be identified. There was a statement by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover about Chinese espionage in the U.S. That's released and posted on lampposts throughout the community. The Chinese World newspaper editorialized that the anti-Chinese movement was rekindling during this period, or they feared that it was rekindling. Civil rights and the Asian American movement, 1960s to 70s. The passage of the 1965 Immigration Act led to large-scale immigration of Chinese immigrants from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and throughout the diaspora. The Black Civil Rights Movement was supported by many Chinese Americans, was inspirational in sparking the Asian American movement. The Civil Rights Movement began in the Jim Crow South and spread to U.S. Chinatowns, fighting for basic rights and freedoms that had been denied. Student activism lends to community activism. In 1968, there was a march against poverty in San Francisco Chinatown that challenged the model minority stereotype. The Shanghai Commune League was signed in 72, which ended 25 years of isolation between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China. The Shanghai Commune League acknowledged that there is one China, asserted mutual respect and equality in economic relations, and facilitated development of trade relations between the two countries. From this, the U.S. gained China as an ally in the Cold War against Russia. In 1979, China took the UNC from Taiwan and gained international recognition. Congress also passed the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, which placed Taiwan in an ambiguous position of the U.S. providing military support to Taiwan in case of Chinese military incursion. In the same year, all Republic of China, Taiwan, consular offices were closed in the U.S., replaced with People's Republic of China consular offices. In the community, the KMT party controls over Chinatown organizations begin a decline. Deindustrialization in the United States, 1980s to 1990s, friendlier relations between the U.S. and China takes a cultural and economic focus. There were numerous U.S. China events, cultural exchanges between the two nations increased. There was more access now to products, literature, and information about the People's Republic of China, and also increased immigration numbers from China. At the same time, America deindustrializes and moves its manufacturing base to China. China then transforms itself from being the workshop of the world into a rising political and economic powerhouse. This success, though, would be viewed as a threat, later be viewed as a threat. Charges of espionage, both commercial and governmental, become pronounced. The current situation is history being repeated. The period of mutual interchange between the U.S. and China begins decline in 1999, around that time. Charges of Chinese espionage at the Los Alamos National Laboratory led to the filing of espionage charges against Dr. Wenho Li. Public opinion surveys results disclose negative American attitudes towards Chinese Americans. The Chinese question of the 19th century reemerges in the 21st century. The Chinese question then becomes highly politicized again. With regards to Chinese American history is American history, and although history is being repeated today, often for the worse, the history of Chinese in America is now American history. Anti-Asian sentiments continue in cycles, depending on the crises of the moment, political, economic. Difference remains, though, that there is a legacy of resistance and resilience that can be learned. Solidarities have been built and shared with others of all races and nationalities. And with this background, it can help prepare for the next chapter. So the aftermath, some important points here. U.S. China relations affects the treatment of Chinese American community with regards to how it's viewed. Repeal of Chinese exclusion happened because America needed China as an ally. The Cold War itself was a conflict between U.S. and China that led to charges of disloyalty, uh, federal government raids, the Chinese confession programs, scapegoating of Chinese Americans. And then currently, China is viewed as an existential threat, and Chinese Americans are, as a result of that, are racially profiled. Um, on the right these are just some thoughts about what's going on. What happened to the Chinese during exclusion was never fully reckoned with. There's not a whole lot of knowledge taught to, let's say, like in the school systems about Chinese exclusion and its legacy. There was an apology from the House and the Senate in 2011 regarding Chinese exclusion. Tacoma, Washington in 1993, the city issued an apology for violence against the Chinese in Tacoma. Antioch, California, 2021, there was also an apology and a call for racial reconciliation for the driving out of the Chinese from Antioch. Still, during times of economic or political crisis, the yellow peril image emerges, and it's important to learn from history, and if it is being repeated, to change history. So these are just some of the things that I've been covering in my class. It's not everything. I didn't include like all the legal battles. There are many, including Wong Kim Mark, Igwo versus Hopkins, the Mamie Tate case. There's many legal battles. Most of the 14th Amendment cases, the Chinese were actually able to gain some victory with regards to that. But cases related to immigration, they were not so successful, except for the Wong Kim Mark case, because of the fact he argued that he was born on U.S. soil and therefore had all rights of citizenship. And that completes the presentation. Well, I guess if there's no more questions, you could always email me, hdong@berkeley.edu, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Although I won't be able to write like a long essay response, maybe something brief with regards to my thoughts.
Thank you, Harvey. I think the group really appreciates you taking the time to tell us about your thoughts on Chinese American history and all the work you've been doing. Before we break away, I put in the chat a link to the Chinese chapter and what we're all about. And I want to let you know about our next couple of events. We do have another webinar on 9/4/25 next in a month.
Thank you for listening, even though I can't hear you directly. And also make sure to check out the program September 20th, which thanks to CAA Chinese chapter, we're able to bring some very powerful speakers and writers, okay, including Stephen Law, Beth Lou Williams, and Fei Mayan Ying. That's September 20th at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center. And then September 19th on Friday will be a talk by Beth Lou Williams focusing on her book on Chinese exclusion and racial laws.
So Harvey, he can't hear me, but he did cover one of the events, and before he talked on September 4th, we're having Renee Chow, Dean of College of Environmental Design, talk about her subject is urban waters and a bridge history for the future of cities. And she'll talk about the importance of planning and her collaborations with China on projects and how nature of those collaborations have shifted over the years based on U.S. China relations. So that is also slated in the next month and a half. And then in October, we're going to have our Berkeley China Summit. And that brings leaders from and alumni from Berkeley and leaders from the U.S. and Chinese industry. And we'll talk about business, technology, and innovation. And that will be at Poly Pavilion on campus. So that's on October 4th, 2025. So it's an in-person event, and if you are around, that's a wonderful event to attend. And if you need more information, you can email us. So again, thank you guys very much for attending. We had 50 people on this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event on 9/4 and maybe 9/20. So you have any other questions, please email us. And thank you very much.